Around the beginning of 2022, I was going through my Steam queue and came across an unusual game. Othercide, a game made by Lightbulb Crew and published by Focus Entertainment, is very easy to market. It's got one of the most interesting art styles I've seen in quite a while, sort of a mix between Beksinski and Sin City. That, on its own, makes it easy to market, but what held my interest is the apparent narrative that was being told. You would be helping the Red Mother fight against suffering, as the last bastion of humanity remaining. Even without seeing the gameplay, that sold me right away, as I'm a definite sucker for nightmare fuel. Before I get deeper into this review, because I guess this is a review, I need to cover some ground lines here. I will be talking about the story, but that will be later on, and I can definitely guarantee that the story is the most interesting part of this game. And I need to put in a few content warnings for those of you I convinced to give this a shot. Othercide is a dark, grim game about a world that's very nearly fallen to suffering with a capital S. That includes every kind of torture you can think of, but mostly includes rape and child abuse. While nothing explicit is shown or talked about, it's a big part of the story itself, and if that isn't your cup of tea, I'd recommend passing on this game. Now that we've covered that, let's talk about what you as the player actually do. Combat in Othercide gives you control of a group of daughters, which are pretty much your units of this game. To start, you have control of 3 different classes. Blade Masters are your classic offensive daughters. They can be built to use various stances that allow the daughter to react outside of the turn order, or become hypermobile, dashing around while dealing damage. Shield Bearers are your defensive paladins. They have a shield that negates a ton of damage in the direction they're facing, and gain far more health than any other daughter. They can support others with graces, which allow them to stop attacks or react under certain conditions. They also gain many mobility tools that allow them to push enemies around or knock them out of the turn order entirely. And both of these daughters are supported by the Soul Slingers, which can buff the team to enhance the damage output of individual attacks for a certain duration. They can also speed up a daughter who's fallen behind, allowing them to act more frequently than they normally would be able to. Put together, these 3 classes work extremely well. As they level up throughout the game, they also build up traits that enhance their stats even further. In my first playthrough, I had a Blade Master named Blanche who became an absolute nightmare to anything within even half the map of her. This is a great way to incentivize continuing to resurrect a daughter over multiple runs, or even multiple times within each recollection. If you've played Darkest Dungeon, the game's roguelike elements may seem familiar to you. You start each run, called Recollections, with 3 new daughters and a cemetery of dead ones from previous runs. You can resurrect the dead ones using tokens, which you get from rescue missions, and a few longer-term buffs you build up over the playthrough. The goal of each run? Get as far through the Dark Corners recollection as possible. Each recollection has 5 eras, with a set boss at the end of that era. Once you encounter the boss for the first time, you can confront them immediately. And once you beat a boss, it gives you a remembrance, which allows you to skip that era in future recollections. This goes a long way to help stop the game from getting tedious, as I can't imagine what it would be like to try and kill all 5 bosses in a single run. On top of the era remembrances, you build up other remembrances that give permanent buffs to all of your daughters. These get to be insanely powerful too, allowing most endgame enemies to be one-shot. Once you reach as far as you can in a run, or fail at killing a boss, the recollection ends and a new one begins. You get awarded with a resource that allows the activation of more remembrances, and off you go again. Now, if you're not a fan of the roguelike elements of Othercide, I have good news. The developers did eventually patch in another mode, Dream. During Dream, your daughters heal half of their health at the end of each day, allowing you to preserve them more easily than in their default difficulty. You also get 1 resurrection token at the beginning of each run, so if there's a specific daughter you'd like to keep bringing back, or even just want to prolong a run, then you have that option. Note that runs can still end if you fail a boss, so it's still not the easiest experience, but it's far less punishing than the game's default settings. Combat is generally done in an XCOM style, but instead of using a set turn order, daughters and enemies will be placed on a timeline that they can move up and down. There are many ways to change something's place on the timeline, and it adds a dynamism to the combat that you wouldn't see in XCOM, though I've seen similar systems in other games. It leaves me constantly asking myself how I could have improved my order of attacks, because mistakes cost a lot. Every hit that a daughter takes is permanent and difficult to heal, as health can only be regenerated with the sacrifice of another daughter at the same or higher level. This makes you really not want to get hit, and is part of why remembrances are so important in the later levels. Luckily, the game fully supports this, and it's very satisfying to clear an entire level without taking a single point of damage. It also gives more meaning to this game's version of Overwatch, which is more about preventing damage than it is about ambushing enemies. Each action that allows a daughter to act outside of her turn order costs a percentage of her own health to use. This is honestly one of the best ways I've seen to limit Overwatch spam, and it really makes you consider if it's worth it. Do you sacrifice 10% health to stop a boss's giant AoE? Or do you hope that you can avoid it before it goes off? These sort of decisions can only exist because Othercide's combat is very deterministic. Bosses will perform very specific actions in a specific order, and players are able to view every move each enemy has as soon as they spawn. Even the enemy's AI is available to view after the enemy has been seen once, with certain enemies prioritizing targets. The only piece of information that's not made clear to players is if a move will hit or not. Personally, I'd have liked to see dodge chance removed entirely, but for some reason it's still here, laughing at me, with these little guys that have a 70% dodge chance but die in one hit. I don't know why. Speaking of hard choices, there's one last mechanic that's incredibly important to combat: the decision to burst or not. All non-reaction attacks consume AP to perform, and if you consume too much of a daughter's AP in one turn, they enter burst mode. All this means is that their next turn will be far later on the timeline now, but at that point you might as well use all of her AP because she's not getting any slower. This is great for getting out of bad situations, but should definitely be used sparingly, as some enemies take advantage of slower daughters to set up combos on them when they can't move. However, certain daughters can truly shine during burst mode. A bursting Blade Master can easily kill 3 or 4 enemies in the late game. A high-level Soul Slinger can set up several other daughters to succeed even after bursting, and a Shield Bearer can play ping-pong ball with her shield. Finally, I really have to talk about this game's music. During much of the game, it's subtle and you barely even notice it, but that's just to trick you into ignoring it. Then you get to your first boss fight, and the lyrics begin. Suddenly, you're at an Evanescence concert, and you're not sure how you got there. Songs with names like Sacrifice and Soul Swap are playing, and it's not even clear when they started. I had to go into the game's soundtrack to figure this out, and it turns out most boss fights have one track. As the boss fights continue, more gets added to the track, and we start to see the lyrics come in. It combines to give the fights an intense hype to them. You can be losing horribly, but the songs are always there to cheer you on. To shorten this down, the music is amazing. However, that's coming from someone who is a teenage edgelord in college, so take that with a grain of salt. If you've gotten that far into the game, it's pretty safe to say that the songs match your aesthetic. And here's where I place my spoiler warning. If any of the above sounds like an interesting time, now's the time to bow out here and go give the game a try. Otherwise, it's time to go into Othercide's story and bosses, and I can't talk about one without the other. Anyways, memories. As your daughters kill enemies, they'll accumulate memories, which act as upgrades that you can slot into their skills. These memories live up to their name, with each one being a small snippet of the mother's life before she was slain and pulled beyond the veil. The mother, when she was still human, was a chosen one of few children that had the interest of an other. Others, with a capital O, are entities that feed off of human emotions and could be seen as young gods, all attempting to manifest themselves in reality. During her time on Earth, she witnessed many others trying to break through the veil between the worlds in the form of nightmare creatures. One particular other, Suffering, almost succeeded in manifesting as a new god through the exploitation of a chosen one called the Child. While the mother was trying to fight for this chosen one's future, he released an attack that ripped apart the veil and merged the city they were fighting in with unreality. This created the location we see in-game, known as the Dark Corner, where suffering rules. Suffering is an other that was built up from the accumulated deaths and pain of millions of people, but more specifically the pain of the child. During the mother's lifespan, she witnessed a plague, an other-fueled war and betrayal. The child is just one of the results of the plague. Having been abused by his adoptive parents, tortured by doctors, and even experiencing the pain of heartbreak, the child turned inwards and allowed suffering to grow from all the damage his connection with the other had caused him. This, coupled with the knowledge that chosen ones are functionally immortal, invokes a lot of sympathy for the child, though I wish some of it had been brought up sooner in the game's story. Suffering may be his only friend, but it's also a friend with an agenda, and we'll get into that later when we talk about suffering itself. And that's why I love the bosses of this game so much. Mother fights against suffering to try and comfort and save the child, and as we progress, we defeat the sources of his pain one after another, weakening the child so that when we do fight him, he's actually the easiest boss in the game. So, let's go in order. The surgeon is obviously the same doctor that experimented on the child during life. His search for a cure to the unnamed plague led him to use the child as a test subject. Since the child can't die, he was something of a medical miracle, and the surgeon seems to see him as such, which was just a convenient way to brush away the ethics of what he was doing. In-game, he's a bulwark of invincibility until he loses his supporting caretakers. Once he does, he suddenly gets much more aggressive, using palliative care and beginning to self-medicate, making him far more dangerous. He lashes out at those who touch him in melee and uses relentless therapy to try and make breakthroughs. He senses his end is coming and knows he's running out of time to find a cure. The fact that the one he's operating on is a child doesn't even bother him. Some of his quotes during the missions leading up to him even point to his justifications, implying that he knew what he was doing was wrong, but the fact that the child was cursed with an other makes it easier on him. The surgeon is also the first time that the symbolism of Othercide becomes apparent. He's a towering figure, far taller than any other enemy in the game, and has a mantle of scissors connected by sinew. It's assumed that the boss's appearances in the Dark Corner is more of a reflection of how the child used to see them. To a kid, all adults are like the surgeon, huge and imposing. Some of them might be defined by how they interacted with you, such as the surgeon's scissors. Scissors are actually a common theme in all of the environments of the First Era, with many of them appearing in both the foreground and the background. Finding the boss also gives the scissors item, if it wasn't already obvious enough. All of this helps connect the surgeon to what he meant for the child: unending physical pain. And so, we put him down, not as a doctor, but as a torturer. Next, we meet the true cause of the child's agony. Outwardly, he performs the actions of a man of God, but his actions toward the child reveal his true nature. He locked the child in the cellar once the boy contracted the plague and did nothing to ease his pain, only allowing a single maid to feed the boy. His fight begins with him entering confession with a single daughter, pronouncing her damned, and preventing all other daughters from moving. The damned daughter must continue fighting the pig alone until he's taken enough damage to end the confession. He alternates between confession and moving, allowing the next daughter to enter confession as he takes rests. If he's too far away from the damned daughter, which he usually is as he targets the farthest one, he'll perform a pilgrimage towards her. Eventually, he'll absolve her and move on to another confession. Symbolically, the Deacon represents captivity and imprisonment. Even his era is called the Cellar Prison. The Deacon is covered in keyholes, and his scepter is a gigantic key. With every action, he seeks to limit the movement of his attackers. But how did the child see him? He's not the towering figure that the surgeon was. On the contrary, he bears another resemblance. Instead of having a voice, the Deacon has a squeal. To the child, he was oddly close to a pig. And there's several references to this in codex entries. It seems a little out of place, doesn't it? And then we find out why. The next boss, the Maid, is actually evidence of how dangerous love can be for those who aren't prepared for that level of emotion. She's the same maid that used to feed the child while he was locked in the cellar by the Deacon. Eventually, the Deacon took out some of his pent-up frustrations on the maid and threw her into the cellar. Unable to approach her due to his infected flesh, The child's only moments of true human contact came as he held the dying Maid in his arms. In the dark corner, however, she's become the most intimidating boss you'll face up until now. The Maid is now a clockwork beauty that reacts to nearly everything the player does to fight her. Every action causes her to gain more and more armor, eventually making her nearly unkillable. Even moving causes her to attack, and you begin to realize that her real turn has always been your turn. It's clear that you aren't ready for this fight. And then, when all seems lost and victory seems impossible, a new daughter appears, the Scythe Dancer. Specializing in fighting armored enemies and breaking through tougher targets, the Maid's last wishes allow you to break through the mire that's been surrounding her memory and finally lay her to rest. She's an amazing battle, and the appearance of a new type of daughter halfway through it marks it as one of the most memorable you'll see. It's probably the fight that I needed to repeat the most times, especially as I learned how to use the newest member of my army. She's the first boss that you have to truly learn and can't brute force. If you learn her attacks and react accordingly, it can almost feel like a dance. She's not out to get you, just to tell you how to proceed. Unlike every other boss up to this point, she's on your side and being forced to fight against her will. The Maid is wonderful and incredibly important to the child's story. Her death was his breaking point when he finally snapped and started to manifest suffering in reality. It's heavily implied that the Deacon regularly abused and very possibly raped her, and the child knew this. All of the Maid's shame helped to fuel the suffering that was lurking within him. But he thought that if she ever saw that other side of him, she would hate him just like the rest. He truly loved the Maid, and though it may never have been reciprocated, I think we can all understand how that level of emotion can break someone. I'm going to stop a moment and talk about the enemies you've been fighting up until the child. Initially, you fight cultists who all bear a resemblance to the surgeon with both their robes and mask. As you progress, though, the enemy forms begin to twist, giving rise to nightmares and abominations like the Worm or the Reaper. It's revealed during several of the Codex entries that these creatures are given form by the child himself, channeling the power of suffering to animate the clay sculptures he made from the floor of his cellar prison. They were his only friends, and at this point, every time you kill one, you can hear him lamenting their loss. While the mother once intended to take away the child's agony and free him from suffering, she instead only increases it with each of the monsters she kills. At last, we get to the child, who predictably isn't a hard fight. With the sources of his pain removed, all he has left is the depleting hatred towards someone actively trying to help him. He tends to attack with brute force, making many easy-to-dodge attacks that, I assume, would deal massive damage if they hit. There isn't much to say about him that I haven't already talked about. By this point, he's too frustrated and confused to think clearly, and it's very obvious he was never ready to fight us directly. The physical design of the child is pretty straightforward. He's a character defined by his connection with suffering, so he's sitting on top of the upside-down crescent moon that is Suffering's symbol. We see this symbol in many locations in the game, but most notably in the creatures. As we progress through the game, the early game enemies get replaced by ones that are warped just a bit further. Present in all of them is the crescent moon, usually piercing the area just behind the head. Suffering is taking control, and on the child itself, we can see this through the hands coming from the symbol holding on to the poor boy. If we don't stop this soon, there's not going to be anything left of him. Even when we find him, he's locked himself in a room with hundreds of imitation sculpts of the Maid's face. He's become lost to his despair, because no one ever showed him there could be anything else. And so, after so long, we come to suffering itself. At first, the fight with the Nucleus seems even easier than the child. As time has gone on, new enemies appear in the form of corrupted daughters. These are the main attackers for the first part of the fight, and as you near the end of the battle, the Nucleus begins to hatch. The last blow lands, and you understand suddenly why it was so easy. You haven't even begun to fight suffering yet. Suffering is terrifying, and it should be. You've broken through so many problems to get to this point, beating all of them one after another. But then, suffering reveals how far away you really are. At first, it seems like you can handle it. You can hurt the monster, and with every strike it bleeds. And then, it seems to wake up. First one daughter falls, then another. It teleports around the arena, bringing suffering to both itself and your daughters. When one daughter finally manages to get within range to attack it, the monster blasts her away, forcing her to waste an entire turn to get back. It spends its turns disrupting your positions, delaying your turns, and if you're really unfortunate, taking several of its own turns before you even get one. It's when it starts killing your daughters in one hit that you realize it doesn't care about your numbers. If you can't end this fight quickly, you will never get a chance to attack it, and suffering will live up to its name. At first, this fight might seem like agony, but that's a much worse game. This is suffering, and it breaks you out of a sense of confidence you have just after the child's fight. Of course you weren't ready. You're fighting a god. When you broke Suffering's connection to the child, it began to leech off the newly reforged memories of the Red Mother instead. Each lost daughter gave its strength, building its reserve of power, and the sense of unfairness is very much intentional. But you keep getting back up, and eventually, at last, the final slash lands. And Suffering falls, bringing with it a rush of catharsis that I haven't felt since my old days of learning to play games for the first time. Even as it falls, though, it promises that it will be back. You can't truly kill suffering, because the world will always have suffering in it, but you can prevent it from self-perpetuating. Okay, can we stop a moment? We need to talk about suffering and why it was sending nightmare creatures out across the Veil. Others are strange creatures, and many of the chosen ones become ostracized because they are rightly feared for what they can do. The child was feared because of his ability to perpetually survive a disease that was killing everyone. But that's the thing about others. Their one goal is strange, almost unrecognizable to humans. The one thing they want is to be real, to truly matter to the world beyond the Veil. Suffering didn't spread its influence or cause pain without reason. His aim was to break through into reality and truly experience it. Even as it dies, it says, "I wanted nothing. Compassion? Love? No. Only to exist." The others aren't human, and are forced to perpetuate themselves through humans. Can we even judge suffering for what it's done? Even if all it can do is cause torment as a way to sustain itself, it's also trying to exist. And yet, the mother came into unreality and hunted it down. Well, yes, actually, we can judge it. By taking on human traits from both its connection to the mother and child, we know a few things. Suffering intended to break through the veil and become not just a living being, but also a god. It revels in its own power, with each daughter that dies in the final chapter of the game, claiming her as yet another piece of its army. Suffering could have simply lived, but it chose to rise to greater heights. It showed no empathy for those its touch left a mark on, and even the small comforts it gave to the child were more of a fantasy than anything that could actually help him. It fully understood what it was doing was hurting the real world. It couldn't make that sacrifice, and even during its final boss fight, damages itself with nearly every attack in desperation to win. Even as it's taunting you, it brings itself closer and closer to death. Either it's so certain it can finish you in the fight before you can, or it recognizes that if it doesn't put absolutely everything on the line, it will lose everything it worked for. Because it's scared of the mother, and for good reason. The mother was once two entities. She was the chosen one we know of, who brought down nightmare creatures and hunted for other chosen ones. But she was also an other. This other was called Memory, and during the final moments of her story, she and the mother merged into one entity, called the Red Mother. Memory was very unique, being able to use the events of the mother's life to alter reality while in unreality, and by extension, the Dark Corner. The daughters that fight for you are the living memories of her students and the skills that she's built up over hundreds of years. She had a near inexhaustible supply of monster fighters. And now we get to the final part of the game. Each cycle through the Dark Corner is a recollection of the mother's fight against suffering. Memory is trying to restore the Dark Corner to reality by using the mother's past to fight for the future. Memory, like suffering, can't truly die in unreality, but she can keep building more and more power off of the events that have already taken place. As your daughters are manifested over and over, they gain the power to hold suffering at sword point. Even after you've succeeded, it's not over. You're stuck in the final part of the game, reliving the same events over and over. Suffering's death is the last part of the Red Mother's war, and the only way she can take the child away from him for good. But neither of them can die. They can only ensure the other cannot exist, and to prevent the self-perpetuation of suffering. Othercide did not start as a game I was expecting much from. Its XCOM inspirations were plain to see, but I'd actually consider it better than many of its inspirations, even though I've played only a few of them. Its combat always had me looking for ways that I could have improved the order I did things in, and as you can probably tell, I absolutely love the art, music, and the boss design. If you're looking for a strategy game with some optional roguelike elements, I'd highly recommend taking a look at this game. I, for one, am very interested in what this developer releases next, as their first game has elevated itself to one of my favorites. So this video was very surprising to me, as I already was working on something completely different. The moment I beat Suffering, though, I felt inspired. I had to tell people about this game. I'd already been recommending it to everyone, but now I can do so with much greater certainty. It's rare to see a game capture my attention so completely, and I'm glad to suddenly have a platform to tell others about things. I still have another video in the works, but this was a minor side journey I felt needed to happen to keep me sane. If you'd like to join the community, we have a growing Discord linked in the description. If you want to support me a little more, there's also the option of adding yourself to my Patreon. These kind of videos, usually, take a huge amount of time and not a small amount of money to research and put together, so any support is really appreciated. Until next time, have a safe trip through the Dark Forest.